my name is Beth Massey, and today I'm going to show you one way to create a one-to-many or master detail data entry form using Windows Presentation Foundation, or WPF. So I've got Visual Studio 2008 Service Pack 1 open, and the first thing we're going to need to do is get some data. If you've been following along with these videos, then you'll be familiar with this simple database we created in the first video. This database has 4 tables for customers and their related orders. So let's go ahead and create a new project, File, New Project, and we're going to call this WPF Master Detail. Okay, so make sure you select WPF application. Okay, so what we want to do is edit orders and their related order details. In the last video, I showed how you could create an editable grid using a list view control. We're going to build upon that technique so that we can edit the orders and their related order details in tabular style or grid style on this single window. We're also going to want to display foreign keys like this customer ID, and in the order detail, this product ID. Instead of having the user enter a meaningless key here, we want to display a list of customers or a list of products. So the first thing we're going to need to do is access this data in the database. There are many ways to do this with Visual Studio 2008, but for this example I'm just going to use simple link to SQL classes to access it. But data sets or your own collections would also work just fine. So link to SQL is appropriate here because I've got a very simple data model. Alright, so let's go ahead and go Project, Add New Item, Link to SQL Classes, and we're going to just name it OMS, same as the database name. And I'm going to drag all of these tables in our database onto this Object Relational Designer. This is because we're going to need to access data from all of these tables. So let's jump on over to our XAML, and instead of boring you with creating this form from scratch, because it's a fairly complicated form here with master and details and buttons and that sort of stuff, I'm just going to paste in the layout that I've already pre-created. And I've created a grid view, or a list view basically, with the view set as a grid view, just like I did in the previous video, so you can follow that video on how I created that. And you'll note that I don't have any of the bindings set up on any of these controls yet, okay? So we're going to do that next. But first I'm going to need to set up some code to handle the focus on each of the items as we select an item in this grid so that we can synchronize our position. So that's what I did in the last video. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to our code behind here and paste in that code. So now we can get to the good stuff. So I'm going to create a private field here called DB as new OMS data context, so that's accessing our data model here. And then I'm also going to need another field for our order data, and it's just going to be a very simple collection of orders of order. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and in the load event of our window, or loaded event of our window, okay, I'm going to go ahead and fill in this collection. So what we can do is we can say just simply set me.orderData equal to db.orders. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to get the sources for those list boxes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new customer list. Okay, and this is going to also be a link query on top of our link to SQL classes model here. So I'm going to say from C in db.customers. Okay, and I'm only going to select the customers where they have orders. Okay, so c.orders.count, because there are a lot of customers in my database. I have a couple hundred of them in there, and it's not a good idea to display hundreds of items inside of a list box. Okay, so I'm just going to say select, and we don't need all of the fields from our customer. We really just need its customer ID, and we need to display its name, a name. So since it's in last name and first name, what I'm going to do is just alias, create a new field here, and I'm going to say c dot last name, and then we're just going to display it like this in a comma, and then c dot first name. Okay, and then whoops, and then we're going to go ahead and order it. Let's go ahead and order by the name. Okay, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a product list from p in db.products now. Okay, let's select all of them. We're going to select p dot the product ID. We're just not going to select all the fields. And this one I also want to order by the name. Okay, so now we have our data collections. So now we have to bind these collections of data to all of those controls in our XAML. So let's go ahead and jump back over to our XAML, and the first thing I want to do is start setting up the bindings to the order data here. Now for this example, I'm going to create what's called a collection view source, and we're going to stick these inside of our window resources. In previous videos, I was simply setting the data context of these controls, and in that case I was setting the whole entire Windows data context to the data source, which was a table or an object collection. But because I want to add a master detail as well as hook up some lookup lists this time, it's going to be easier for me to add these collection view source objects and bind them in the XAML, and then set them in code. Their source property would then become those data collections. Okay, so this will become easier once we start building this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside of the Windows Resources section. So let's just create one here, window.resources. Okay, and I'm going to create a couple objects called collection view source. Okay, and we're going to need to specify the key for them, and I'm going to call this the master view. Okay, so this will be our orders, and then I'm going to create a detail view. Okay, I'm also going to create a customer lookup, and then also a product lookup. Okay. Now, the one thing we're going to do with the detail view, though, is we're going to chain it to the master view. Okay, so basically what we want to do is we want to set the bindings source, okay, or the source of the view source, the source property. Here in XAML, we can do that for this one. There we go, and we're going to set this binding source, and it's going to be the static resource master view. Okay, now the other thing I'm going to want to set is the path, okay, because the path is going to tell me which child collection of the master, in our case order, should this bind to, should the detail bind to. And the path is going to be order details. Okay, so that's the name of the collection of off of the order object called order details. Okay, so we're just going to need to specify the path right here. Okay, the rest of the source properties on the other three here, master view, customer lookup, and product lookup, we'll set in code. Okay, so let me just fix that. There we go. Okay, so the first thing we want to bind is we want this stack panel area, we want to bind to the master. Okay, so this right here, this stack panel 2, we want to bind to the master, which is our orders. Now, the master view is basically the static resource we need to bind to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the data context here. So data context equals, and what that'll be is a binding, and the source of it is actually going to be equal to the static resource, okay, and the static resource is master view. Okay, so now all the controls here, now what we're going to do is we're going to start to bind to the actual properties on an order. Okay, so what I want to do is for the text box here, I want to just do like a read-only, or basically a one-way binding on the order ID. So we're going to set the text property. Okay, that's going to become a binding as well. And the path, because we've already set the source, the data context there, order ID, but this mode will be one way, meaning it's going to be read only. Okay, so that's how that. Now the other one I'm going to do is the combo box. We'll save that for last in a second. Let's do the other two text boxes. These are going to be text equals, these are going to be two-way. We're going to be able to edit this, binding path, and this is going to be the order date. Okay, and I can just copy this and put it in here. This will be the ship date. Now, the combo box we want to bind, that's ship date. The combo box we want to bind to the customer ID on the order, okay, but we want to display the value of the customers, okay, the list of customers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first specify that the combo box is not editable, because we want to force users to actually choose a value. Okay, so that's false. Okay, the other thing is what I'm going to do is I specify the item source, and the item source is going to be the list of values, and that is going to be a binding. Okay, and the source of it is going to be this static resource, and it's going to be that customer lookup collection view source. Lookup. Okay. Now, the other things we need to, now that just displays the stuff in the list. Now what we need to do now is we need to bind the results, like basically what the user selects, back into the order. Okay, so that is going to be the selected value path. Okay, selected value path is going to be customer ID. Okay, so that's the property on the list of customers. Okay, and then we want that selected value path to basically be the selected value. Okay, and this is going to be the binding back into this order. Okay, and they happen to be named the same, customer ID. Oops, sorry, I don't need a, there we go. Okay, now the last thing we want to do is we want to display a value. So what's the display member path? And that is just going to be the name field. Okay, so display member path and selected value path are the properties on this actual item source. Okay, what's being displayed. And then selected value, when someone selects an actual value, we're going to put that into the customer ID property on the order itself. Okay, so that's how we set up that combo box. Okay, so now we need to go ahead and we need to bind our details. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go down to the list view. Okay, and in this list view, we're going to do almost exactly the same thing. It also has an item source. Okay, so let's go ahead and specify item source. Items source is equal to, and this will be our binding to the static resource, and it's going to be that detail view this time. Okay, so this is going to display the list of details. Okay, so that's the collection view source in the resources section we created. Now the other thing we want to do here that I mentioned when we created our grid last time, our editable grid, is we're going to need to we're going to want to synchronize the position that we are in this list view, in this editable grid, with the collection view. Okay, and the collection view allows us to add and remove items from the collection, and also tell what the position is, and do currency. Okay, so it knows where we are in this collection. So we also want the grid to be able to recognize this. So is synchronized with current item. Okay, yes, true. Okay, all right, cool. So now we got to go down into our data templates. and we're going to start setting up the bindings. So now that we've got the details view as the item source, we can set all of these binding properties to the path. Basically, the path is set as the properties of the order detail object. Okay, so binding path equals, and in this case, this is the ID. This will be the order detail ID. Okay, that's the primary key. I'm just showing it for our display, for our purposes here in this demo. You probably wouldn't do that to a user, okay? But we can see the relations and that sort of thing are maintained. Okay, so binding, this will be the path to the order ID itself. Okay, that's the foreign key. We'll skip product for a minute. That's also a combo box, but it's basically the same idea. And then this text box, we're just going to make the text a binding. So, and this is the quantity, path. It's quantity. Okay, and we've got one more text box down here for the price. Okay, see, make sure I didn't mess anything up here. Oh, I forgot a quote. There we go. Okay, so now we've got to set up the list of products here. Okay, so it's going to be very similar to how we did the customers, except this time we want to make sure that we say is synchronized with current item is false. So is synchronized with current item equals false, because we don't want all of the products to display the same product. If we said is synchronized with current item equals true, then basically as we selected one of the order details and changed the product line on that, all of them would change, and we don't want them to do that. We want to make sure that when we select a product on each of these detail lines, they're all independent. Okay, so the other thing, okay, so synchronized current item is false. We now need to set up the item source. Okay, and that is going to be basically a binding to our static resource for product lookup. Okay, so binding source equal to static resource. Okay, and this is going to be product lookup. Make sure I spelled that right. Okay. So now, same idea with the we need to specify a selected value, a display member path, and the selected value path. Okay. So the selected value, this is what's inside of the order detail. Okay. Selected value, we're going to bind to binding path. Inside the order detail, there's a product ID. Okay. Now for the selected or the display, or well, we can do selected value path. Okay, so this is the selected value. This means inside of this item source, the product ID. Oops, prod cut. That's not going to work. Product ID. And then display member path is going to also be name. Okay. Cool. All right, so now let's go ahead and get back to our code, because what we're going to need to do now is set up the source properties for the rest of these collection view sources. So I'm going to flip back over here. Okay, and the first thing we're going to need to do is get a reference to these collection view sources. Okay, so let's create a couple more variables up here. Okay, so I'm going to private master view source as collection view source. Okay, and we're going to do a detail. Okay, the other thing I want to do is once we set the sources, we'll be able to get at the views. Now, these view sources create what's called a view, and if you've had watched any of the previous WPF videos where I showed how to manipulate the position, what we did is we created basically a view from a static method called on the collection view source. Now, you can pass the collection view source a data context, say of the window, and it will return a view. But but since we're using our specific view sources, we're just going to be able to access master view source and detail view source's view properties. Okay, so but I want to save these views so that we can add, update, or we can add and remove and move the position of the view. Okay, so let's just go ahead and create a private, and I'm going to have an event handler on the master view. Okay, so it's going to be a binding list collection view in this case. Okay, and then private detail view as binding list collection view. Okay, so now let's grab these suckers. So we're going to go into the window loaded event here, and we'll just go right underneath all of our data here. I'm going to say now we need to get a reference to these view sources. So me.master view source is going to be equal to, we're going to have to convert this me.find resource. Okay, we're going to ask the form or the window here to find this resource by name. Okay. So that is master view, and it is going to be basically casted to a collection view source. Okay, so now we do the same exact thing for detail. Okay, and we just call this detail. Okay, and now what we can do is set the source properties if we needed to, but the only source property we really need to set is for the master view. Okay, so the master view source, okay, is going to equal to me.orderData. Okay, and now we're going to want to do is set the source properties for the customer and product lookup lists. Okay, so since we're not going to use those sources, we're not going to need to manipulate the position inside of the lookup lists themselves. I'm just going to create local variables for those view sources. So we can just say dim cust source. Okay, and this will be the same thing. Actually, you can just go up here, copy one of these. It's quicker to type, except of course the name of it is customer lookup. Okay, and now you can say cust source.source source is going to be equal to the customer list. Okay, and the same goes for the product. The product collection view source, okay, is going to be product lookup. Okay, and then prod source.source is going to be equal to the product list. Cool. All right, so now we can go ahead and grab the view for the master and detail view. So me.master view is going to be equal to the me.master view source.view. Like I mentioned, this property is the view. Okay, we're just going to need to cast it to a binding list collection view. Okay, and same thing with the detail. Okay, so detail view source. Now, since we're working with master details, the one thing you have to know about a details view is that the view, meaning the related order details in our case, is going to be changing anytime we skim through or scroll through the master, which is the orders. Okay, so the view changes. So if we just grabbed a single reference in the beginning to this details view, it's only going to be the first set of order details. Okay, so what we really want is anytime the master view changes, we need to reset this details view. Okay, so that way when we hook up all of our buttons, click events, we can use master and detail view and not have to worry about exactly what, getting a new reference for it. So I'm going to get the reference by handling the current change of the master view. So let's just go ahead and go to our master view, and you'll see current changed here. If you're using C#, you'll just hook up the event handlers in the load event. So I've got master view current changed, event handler, and so what we can do is just copy this line of code right there. Okay. All right, so now we're not doing any sort of adding or removing. We don't have any of our buttons hooked up yet, but let's go ahead and run this and make sure that it works. Okay, so let's go ahead, F5. Okay, so there we go. So now we've got our master and details, and we can see that it's displaying 2 details here for this particular order. And we've got the drop down full of our customers that had orders, and we've got our products listed in alphabetical order, and you'll see that they're different, okay, for each line. Cool, very cool. All right, so let's go ahead and hook up all of our buttons. Okay, let's jump on over to our XAML here. We'll just refresh this form, and I'm just going to go ahead and double click on add order to handle this add, and this will be pretty easy. I'm just going to say me.masterView add new, okay, and then we just need to say me.masterView commit new. There we go, commit new. Okay, so this actually hands you back an object that you can cast. In this case, it would be an order, and you could set properties on it or do whatever you want before you actually commit it to the collection. Okay, so it's similar to the WinForms binding source in that case. Now, the other thing to note is that these methods, add new, commit new, they are only available in the .NET Framework 3.5 Service Pack 1. So it's very important that you make sure you use Service Pack 1 to work with the children too. Okay, so it has some features as well to work on the children. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back to our form. You've stuck with me this long, we're almost here. So if we want to make sure that we are on a current item or a current position is not -1, then we can say me.masterView.remove at me.masterView.current position. Okay, so let's go back over here to moving. Okay, so me.masterView.move current to previous. Okay, and then the next me.masterView.move to next. Okay, and save we'll do in a minute. Let's do the add detail now. So now it's detail view dot add new. Okay, me.detail view dot commit. Okay, and then delete detail. Now in this case, for deleting the details, we're just going to go and set me. So for this one, we're just going to say if me.detailView.current position is greater than -1, then me.detailView.remove at me.detailView.current position. Okay, so one thing we're going to want to do with our particular data access using link to SQL is that we're going to want to delete all of the children order details in our case anytime we delete a master in the order. Okay, so what we can do here is we can say dim order equals, we can convert the type, ctypes, me.masterView.current item, okay, is actually an order. Oops, or there we go. Okay, so now we can say for each detail in order details, okay, we have to tell the db.orderDetails. There we go, delete on submit. All right, we have to delete on submit. We have to tell the data context of link to SQL to delete any of the children too when we remove a parent. Okay, now if you had a cascading delete in your database, then you wouldn't have to do this at all. Okay, so let's just delete on submit. I'm just basically telling it to do this. All right, so detail. Okay, now we can go ahead and do that. All right, so the last final thing is the save. Okay, so this is pretty easy now that we've got all this together. Save changes or submit changes. Okay, and we'll just put a message box that we saved it. Otherwise, we'll report the error here. X to string. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so now we can go ahead and hit next, and you'll see as we're scrolling by, you can see there's all of our orders changing. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and add a new order. Select new person, and we'll add a new detail. Okay, select the product, quantity 1, price 2. Let's add another one, Oreos, to price 3. Let's say next or previous. Actually, that was the end. Let's delete this order, and let's edit an order. Ship date. Let's put a ship date on here. 7/1/08. Took a long time to ship that one. Change of quantity 5. All right, press save, and we've saved. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. That's one way that you can create a master detail form in WPF. So I'd like to thank you for your time. If you'd like to check out more videos, you can look on MSDN Developer Centers, or for more information on WPF and Windows Forms development, head on over to windowsclient.net. Thanks again.